All right, we are back again. Swim jigging. Let's talk about the swim jig rod I picked up over at Senko Sticks HQ the other day. I guess before we get into it, any of you that haven't watched my video, I posted a week and a half ago or so where I actually drive over to Senko Sticks headquarters and give you guys kind of a shop tour, introduce you to the guys and gals that create these awesome rods and show you the process and really what goes into building each and every one of these rods. Definitely go check it out. Super cool. A lot of people had a lot of positive feedback on that video. A lot of people were very intrigued by the process. So definitely go check that out. And I what I did when I was there, I picked up 5 or 6 new rods, but truth be told, I really have only got to mess with 2 of them, simply because right after I left there, I only had like 2 days of work booked, and then following that, we were in the hospital having our newborn son. And I obviously haven't been able to fish. Now I have a week off spending time with the family, and then I'll obviously get to fish with the remainder of the rods. I think I picked up a frog rod, a chatterbait rod, a worm rod. I don't even remember, but either way, I'll get to put those to the test. But those 2 days following, I got to play with my spook rod, which was one of the rods I was most excited about. I gave a video on that just the other day. It was probably the video posted previous to this, so be sure to check that out. If you're looking for a rod to throw a big walking bait on, a super spook, a big pop-R, or maybe a medium to large size whopper clopper, that would be an awesome rod, as well as like a buzz bait or a spinner bait I talked about in the video as well. But one of the other rods I picked up was this, what I picked up as a swim jig rod, and couldn't be more happy with it. So let's talk about it. Really, there's only like 2 technique specific rods or setups that I'm very picky about when it comes to my fishing. I guess I'm picky about all of them, but these ones I take, I don't know, I'm extra picky about. One of them being flipping, just because that is my favorite way to catch a bass. So all of you that have been following me for a long time know there's a lot of certain things I look for in a good flipping stick and what reel I use, and I'm very particular with that technique. But the other one is a swim jig. And there's a reason for it, and I'm going to get into it right now real quick. A lot of you that have been following me for a while might already know this story, but I'll go ahead and list it out to you guys again. So when I first started fishing Lake Okeechobee again, competing in tournaments, I was fishing with my buddy Matt Weta, Matt W Fishing on YouTube. Be sure to check him out if you haven't already. Okeechobee Hammer, but fishes really all over the Southeast competing in tournaments and does very well. Lake Okeechobee was a little bit different back then. Had a lot more grass, had a lot more vegetation, a lot more needle grass, big hayfield, spawning pockets, spawning flats, with all types of grass all throughout. And one of the biggest players, especially like in the fall, winter time on this lake, was a swim jig. And a big reason for that was just how efficiently you could fish them through the grass, and just how efficient you were throwing the bait regardless, all the time. And this was kind of one of the big ones back then, and still is today. This is a 1/2 ounce, or you could throw it in a 3/8. I don't know why this won't focus. No jack, dirty jig swim jig. This is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the best swim jig on the market, especially for heavy cover. Other people will argue, but there's a lot more pros out on the water right now that are sponsored by other jig companies that are throwing this exact swim jig while on tour, especially while the cameras are off. Excuse me. So what makes this jig special? There's a couple of things. One of the biggest things down here in Okeechobee was that big thick gauge hook they put on this one. Now a lot of people are going to say you don't need that thick gauge of a hook to catch a bass, and you don't. But what makes this nice is, A, if you do hook an 8, 9, 10, 11 pounder out here, you don't have no risk of opening that hook up. Other thing is, when that hook gets into a fish's mouth, that thicker gauge, it's going to have more bite to it. It's going to have a better grip on that fish. It's not going to tear the fish's mouth nearly as bad, which results in less lost fish. And then the other nice thing about the thick gauge hook is if you get stuck on a buggy whip or a cattail, we're throwing 65, 50-pound braid, you can easily just reel down, point the rod at it, put your thumb on the reel, and just pull straight back and rip the reed, and you don't have to worry about that hook opening up at all. You can literally recast it right after that, and you're still fishing good. You don't have that hook opened up where you got to risk bending it back, breaking the hook. It's already weakened. It's going to flex open. So this is just super, super, super efficient for fishing here. And either way, we threw them in all different colors, and I still throw them today. Obviously, got one tied up here. But when I was throwing that bait, I did not like it at all. I came out here, we were fishing tournaments, you needed to compete, and I would catch 4 to 6 pound bass on that swim jig, and 2 casts later put it down, just because when it came down to it, I didn't like throwing the bait. It didn't feel right to me. Even if I caught fish, it wasn't my confidence deal. Fast forward, I fished with my father-in-law one day, and he had 4 swim jig rods on the deck of his boat 365 days out of the year. And we were fishing an event one day, and we had a kind of hole in the grass. We rolled up there, and I caught 2 on my rod on a white swim jig, and my trailer ripped off. Well, they were schooling, they were biting. He said, just grab my rod, grab that one right there, and just keep throwing in there. And it was the craziest thing. I'll never forget it. I made a bomb cast, the swim jig hit the water, and I turned the handle twice. And before I even got bit, I said, oh, this feels right. Feels right. And the line jumped, and I caught like a 7.5 pounder on his rod, and I was like, I'm buying this. And what I ended up having to do was pretty much change up my entire setup for throwing a swim jig. What it turned out was I was throwing the swim jig on what was the completely wrong setup to throw it on for me. So you think heavy cover swim jig, everyone thinks a 7.6, like a flipping stick, stiff rod with a high speed reel. And what he was throwing it on was more of like a moderate, medium, heavy, I had a little bit more of a tip to it, a softer tip, and throwing it on more like a high 6-speed reel, like a 6.8. You threw a little bit on a 7, where I was throwing it on like a 7.5 or an 8-to-1 reel. And what I noticed was you're going to get more water time, but also between the little bit slower ratio and that softer tip of that rod, it almost leaves a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, an inch of slack in the line, gives a little bit of a give to it, so that while you're reeling it, when that fish eats it, that rod would load, okay? Almost like you would with a chatterbait. And even in the thicker grass, when you set the hook, like the fish had already loaded the rod up, you had no slack in your line on the hook set, and you could just pencil sharpener the reel, and with that lower gear ratio reel, you had a little bit more torque, and you could literally just bring the fish right to you. I switched it up. You never lose them. You catch big ones, you catch a lot of fish, and your landing ratio is damn near 100%. And ever since then, I realized that your setup that you throw a bait on is very important, and especially with a swim jig. So I went from not liking the bait to it being my #1 thrown bait still this day on the lake. If I only had one bait that I could fish with for the rest of my life out here on Okeechobee, it's that guy right there. I might switch the trailer up to more of a cross style or a different swim bait trailer or what have you, but 1/2 ounce swim jig is the deal. So let's talk about the rod I got here now that we're already 10 minutes into this video. But what I've got here, this is in all intents and purposes, this is a 7.6 medium heavy rod. Now this is the cool thing, and what I mean is you got to use what works for you. Kind of the industry standard for throwing a swim jig all around the country is probably like a 7.3, a 7.4 with a fast tip. Whereas here, I like a 7.6. I really do. I don't do much of the Alabama shake. I don't shake the rod very much. It's more just a long cast and just a slow, steady retrieve with a swim jig. And again, with that softer tip, I'll kind of show you guys here. As you're reeling the bait, this is what I look for. When I'm reeling that bait through the grass, this thing's not going to focus. Instead of having that rod tip just stiff, I want that rod almost just kind of as it comes through the grass, you want that soft tip, all right? That way when the fish jumps it, it's just a jump and it just starts to load, just like you saw there. Reeling it through the grass and it's just a doink, starts to load, and you just continue to reel till it gets tight and just give it a hard, long pull. And you want that whole rod to load all the way through the rod, and you get a good parabolic bend and just load all the way up, and then just turn the handle. And it would amaze you how much your landing ratio is going to go up. You just simply don't lose them. So again, this is a 7.6 medium heavy. Alex built for me. This is their 7.6 medium heavy fast. It's a quarter to 1 ounce rod rated for, and it's a 12 to 20. This is in the BTO series, and this thing came out perfect. Went ahead and put these tapered cork grips on here. This thing is not focusing at all, so I apologize. There you go. Pretty cool. Love this cork. This is some guy makes these. He gets the material from like Portugal or something. Alex was telling me about. He told me to try it out. Absolutely love it. It fits to your hand perfect, so you're not fatigued whatsoever. This rod is perfectly balanced as well, so you're not fatigued when throwing the rod. And if you do some shaking, it's absolutely fine. Another thing that I could point out about this rod, as far as all the ones I picked up, this rod is extremely versatile. There's another one I picked up that I'm going to be using for a frog that might be a little bit more versatile. But other things I would throw this rod for would be maybe throwing a big worm, a big speed worm, dragging a big ball head. I mean, you really could use this for some lighter flipping for sure. If you were looking to get a rod to start flipping and pitching with, and you wanted to make that jump up to that 7.6, 7.5 foot rod, this would be a good one to start out with. It's got that soft tip like I talked about, a little bit softer than I would typically like for flipping like a 3/4 ounce weight. But if you wanted to get started flipping like a 1/2 ounce with like a Senko or something, this is the rod that I would use for sure. But definitely give this a shot. Any of you that struggle with a swim jig, he does make a 7.3 medium heavy that a lot of people might like more for throwing a swim jig, but I like that longer rod. I like that rod to load. I feel like I get more power. I get a longer cast, and I can kind of keep that rod up in the air, and it just has more of a tip, which enables that fish to load. You got to remember, we're throwing 65-pound braid, so there's no stretch. And a lot of times when I'm throwing a big swim jig like this, I'm more or less using it like where you would almost throw a chatterbait sometimes, reeling it through dollar pads, over the top of submerged grass if you can find any, holes in the Kissimmee grass where you are bringing it through some scattered grass, but for the most part it's in the open water, and it's just a slow retrieve. And the reason I like that 1/2 ounce is it gets down in the water column, which I think gets me bigger bites. When a lot of people are throwing a 3/8 and reeling it on top, letting that bait get down, I feel like will get you a bigger bite sometimes. And you want that soft tip to let that fish load up, eat the bait, and turn his head and go away from you. And like I said, I mean, you just don't lose them. You don't lose them with the right rod, with a swim jig. And that's probably my favorite part about it. So that's it. It's a 7.6 medium heavy fast. Definitely check this out. Swim jig rod, best swim jig rod I've ever thrown. I've only caught like 8 fish on it so far, but I haven't lost any. It does everything I want it to do. Definitely check it out if you're looking for a light flipping rod as well. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you guys wanted to save some coin, you're looking to purchase a Senko Sticks of your own, use the code TIGHTSPLICE at checkout, and it'll save you some money. And if you have any questions regarding any of the rods that they offer, feel free to message me, or you can message them directly, but feel free to ask any questions you have for me, and I'll be sure to answer them for you. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you guys on the next one. Tie lines.